Hey everybody, Tim Ulbrich here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. As we wrap up 2023, I extend warm holiday wishes to you and your loved ones on behalf of the entire team at Your Financial Pharmacist. We are truly grateful for your time spent listening to this show. And looking ahead, we're eager to share with you what we have planned for the podcast in 2024. It's going to be an incredible year with lots of great guests and topics that are all designed to help you on your path towards living a rich life today and tomorrow. But before we turn the page into the new year, today we're hitting replay on one of my favorite episodes of the podcast that I recorded back in 2021 when I interviewed Dylin, Redling, and Allison, creators of RetireBy45.com and authors of 3 books, Start Your F.I.R.E, Investing for Kids, and the Personal Finance Workbook for Beginners. Dylin and Allison achieved financial independence retire early status in 2015 when they were in their early 40s. Now, with 4 young boys under my roof, this topic of teaching kids about money, teaching kids about investing is near and dear to my heart. And during the interview, Dylin and Allison discussed their why behind writing Investing for Kids, as well as practical advice and meaningful activities to help with teaching kids about money and investing. Dylin and Allison, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
I've very much been looking forward to this interview to talk more about your story, achieving financial independence and early retirement, and more specifically, the work that the two of you did in writing Investing for Kids, How to Save, Invest, and Grow Money. And Dylin, let's start with you, only because we share an Ohio State connection since you're an alum, so go Bucks. Why write a book specifically designed for kids about investing? What was the motivation behind the work?
Yeah, well, first of all, go Buckeyes. Yes, great connection there. It's interesting because I'll start off with the interesting fact that Allison and I actually don't have kids. And so you would think that the impetus would have been, we had our own kids and we taught them financial literacy and it inspired us to teach more kids. But in fact, we sort of stumbled into this book. This is our second book. Our first book is called Start Your F.I.R.E, A Modern Guide to Early Retirement. And it's all about early retirement and financial independence, which that book just poured right out of us because it's something that we live and we know very well. Mm-hmm. And what happened was the publisher who we worked with on that book came back to us a couple months after that book was published and said, hey, we have an idea for this other book, and it's Investing for Kids ages 8 to 12. And what do you guys think? Because you know about investing and financial concepts, and we think you guys might be able to pull this off. And we thought, wow, we don't have kids. We're not teachers. We don't hang out with kids. We have a few friends with kids, but we don't spend a lot of time with them. Mm-hmm. And so we thought, man, this sounds really challenging and daunting. But it was during the 2020 year of COVID, so we had a lot of time on our hands, and we thought, let's just go for it. And we dove into it, and it was very challenging because we wanted it to be interesting for kids and informative and fun. But somehow we put our heads together and we had a really good editing team that helped us with some of the concepts to relate to kids. And we just dove into it and we just made it happen.
And I think you guys did an awesome job. One of the things that stood out to me as my wife and I were looking through this book as parents of 4 young kids trying to teach this topic of money is that it's very hands-on, it's relatable, it's digestible. Lots of activities, really cool ideas. I often find myself, especially writing, talking about this topic, regularly presenting on this topic, you take for granted how you learn some of this information along the way. I often think, okay, take a concept like compound interest or, mutual funds or index funds or, ultimately trying to determine what your retirement savings goals, any of those concepts. And it's very easy to get lost in the weeds. And I think it's often hard to figure out, how am I going to break this down and teach this with my children and really work through this. And so I found myself looking through this, not only learning myself of, that's a really neat way to teach a different concept or a very visual way or a nice activity to apply that information. So I think as I look through this, whether someone is more advanced in their own knowledge and understanding of personal finance, or whether they feel like they could also learn from these concepts, either one, I think this book could be a really good guide for them alongside of working with their child. So great work in the work that you put together with the book. And Allison, knowing your background as a technical project manager, I'm curious. I mean, how and why did you catch fire, pun intended here, with this topic, not only as an individual pursuit for financial independence, but also in wanting to help guide others through the work that you're doing with retireby45.com and with the book Investing for Kids? Where does the interest come from?
Part of it is that my college degree is actually psychology and education. So I had all these grand ideas of becoming a teacher, an elementary school teacher after I graduated from college. But, after a couple of years, it dawned on me that, frankly, our teachers are woefully underpaid. And there was no clear financial path for me to continue being a teacher, making the salary I was making. So I was living in Boston at the time, and I moved back to New York, where we eventually met waiting tables, of all things. And we came out to San Francisco on a whim. We were on vacation. We were in our mid-20s. We thought, all right, let's check out San Francisco. And so I bounced around from career to career and ended up at a consulting company that eventually brought me into the technical world of the Bay Area. But, so being a project manager is basically being a glorified teacher. So it's grabbing people, wrangling people to do things that you want them to do, but do it in a way that makes them want to be, to work as a team and to learn from each other. So in a way, it was, being a project manager it had very similar tendencies as it was being a teacher. And so we had always thought, it'd be great to retire early, but we didn't really know what retiring early meant. We thought, 55, that seems like a really good age to retire. It's earlier than 65, but, it seems so far in the future. And living in the Bay Area, our expenses were so high that we were like, there's no way, even if we're making decent salaries between the two of us, that we're ever going to retire. But about 11 years or so ago, Dylin came down with double pneumonia and was in the ICU for about 10 days and in the hospital altogether for almost 2 weeks. And that for us was a light bulb moment, because he was within, it was 50-50 chance that he would make it. And so, after that, we kind of thought, okay, do we really want to keep working for the, for the next 25 years or so? And so we kind of made it our goal to get out of the rat race as soon as we could. And so we kind of fell into it by accident. We can talk about that later, but it kind of was a natural progression from all of the things that we'd been doing over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I appreciate you sharing some of the background and story. And we'll come back to, how you got to that point of early retirement. Obviously, as I mentioned in the introduction, early 40s to be able to accomplish that goal. And we'll talk a little bit about how you got to that path, why that was possible as well. And so let's first dig into some of the book of Investing for Kids. Let's start with the main characters of the book, the dollar duo, Mr. Finance and Investing Woman. Allison, tell us more about these two characters, how you came up with the idea, why it was important to the overall text, and how those characters can really help the learner. Again, 8 to 12-year-old is the target group here, engage with the material throughout the book.
Right. Well, first of all, it's kind of funny. Today is actually Superheroes Day. So
there we go.
It's a perfect segue into the topic. We were actually taking a walk one day as we were writing the book, and we were talking about politics of all things. And we were trying to figure out in the administration, whichever administration, whoever won the presidency, what each president could do to make their administration better. And so we kind of were talking about, of all things, the Justice League of America and who we would think would be a good fit for making this country a better country. And so the whole idea of the Justice League kind of thought, we thought, superheroes. Kids love superheroes. Let's talk to our publisher about bringing in some superheroes. And we were like, well, I don't know if they'll go for that. There's some extra graphics involved, and it could be expensive, but we felt that it would really be a good way for kids to relate to finances. And so we kind of pushed hard for this idea of having superheroes teach kids finance.
Yeah, and that stood out to me. And in addition to how visual it is, this does not, especially for a topic like investing, right, can be weighty at times. It can be overwhelming. I often find myself when I'm giving a talk on this topic, it starts with excitement. Often when we think about and then you get into the weeds and you see the eyes gloss over, right, and other things. And this does not read like a textbook in any way, shape, or form. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you for the illustrations, the activities, the superheroes. But I think it very much, reads like an interactive, applicable, nuts and bolts, important information, but how do I actually apply and hopefully get excited about this information? Again, we're thinking about an 8 to 12-year-old of wanting to really hopefully empower them to be excited with this for the rest of their own financial journey. And I very much read this book, as I mentioned, being a father of 4 boys who also lives and breathes personal finance. I really do often find myself in conversation with my boys about money. And honestly, I struggle at times with making the topic of money tangible and meaningful. And it can feel abstract, especially when I find myself trying to say and teach a principle that I very much understand, but it feels more abstract as I talk it out loud. And especially when you start to view it through the lens of a child. And so I like how you start the book with chapter 1 on Money 101. You cover important topics like money doesn't grow on trees, ways to earn money, a little bit of entrepreneurship in there, which is really cool, the history of money, where to keep money. And so, Dylin, here's the challenge that I'm seeing with my boys. In the age of credit cards, debit cards, direct deposit, online banking, digital currency, electronic payment methods, it can feel difficult to teach a child about money when you don't see it, right? There's very little actual physical cash, and therefore it can be hard to connect work. And I think the opportunities from work with earning money, and therefore the opportunity to then save and see it grow. So what are some tips and strategies as you put this book together, as well as the other teaching you've done on this topic about, how can we teach kids about money in a way that it can be relatable, it can be tangible, and then hopefully it becomes memorable for them?
Yeah, that's a really good point about money being very digital in this day and age. I remember when I was a kid, one of the coolest things was my grandmother would give me and my cousins 50 single dollars for Christmas and for our birthday. And it would come in a little box just big enough to hold those 50 $1 bills.
I love that.
And yeah, it was really cool. And, $50 back then for a kid was a lot of money. And those 50 $1 bills would last a really long time. I would take them to the arcade and to the pizza parlor or whatever. And so maybe one way to do it is to actually bring back physical money. And I don't think the amount really matters that much. But like you said, I mean, being able to tangibly feel it, see it, and understand it, it helps a lot more if you're using physical money. And I'll actually give an example that we use on our blog and in actually our Start Your Fire book. I don't think we mentioned it in Investing for Kids, but it's a little story that I like to tell about a money lesson that I actually learned from Allison when we were waiting tables in New York. So we met in a big restaurant in Times Square. And Allison grew up with a little bit of a better financial education in her household than I did. My single mother was wonderful, but it was all paycheck to paycheck. There wasn't a lot of saving or investing. So I came into our initial relationship not very good at dealing with money. So anyway, we were waiting tables. So all of our money pretty much was in tips. And so we'd have tons of cash. And I remember just putting the money, I would wad it up into balls. I would stuff it into all 4 of my pockets because I was busy. And then we would go out afterwards, and Allison saw how I was treating my money. And she was like, "What are you doing? How do you even keep track of that? That's awful." And so she taught me this little lesson, and she doesn't even remember this because this was 25 years ago, but it stuck out in my head. And basically, I call it the wallet lesson. And you take all of your bills and you put them nicely, neatly in order from small to big or big to small, whatever works. Fold it neatly into your wallet. And it's really simple, but the reason it was impactful for me is because it just got me to think about how to respect and treat money. You work really hard for money.
That's right.
And if you don't treat it well, you don't respect it, that $50 might not seem like a big deal, but when it gets to 100,000 or $500,000 and you don't have that same respect and feel for what that money represents and how hard it was to earn it, you're not going to put it and treat it and save it and protect it as well as you could.
Such a good example of a behavioral move, right? The number of dollars didn't change, but how you treated them, how you respected them, how you viewed them. And I think many of our listeners know we talk on this show often that I believe personal finances, it's about the math and it's about the behavior. And both of those are very important. And some of those types of moves are here teaching kids in that way, I think can be very powerful as well. Allison, chapter 2, Save Your Money. You have an activity titled Be an Interest Rate Detective. I love this. I thought this was a really cool interactive activity where you challenge the reader to work with an adult to research interest rates for a local bank savings account, a CD, so certificate of deposit, and an online savings account. So again, this was just one of many example activities you have throughout the book. But why is an activity like this so important in terms of someone being an interest rate detective to experience and go through this as they begin their journey of understanding some of the basics of investing?
So part of it is we wanted all the activities to be something that kids could do with the adult in their life. And we didn't assume that every child has a parent, because we know in this modern day and age that families are different nowadays. And you might have two moms or two dads or a grandmother or a grandfather or a guardian of some sort. So we wanted something that people could do together with kids could do together with someone else. And we thought, it's going to be interesting because banks are closed during COVID. When we were writing the book, it was right in the heart of shelter in place. But we thought, kids have access. So most kids have access to computers, or they can at least walk around to a local bank. And banks always have, their advertisements on their windows with their interest rates. But we thought it would be an interesting way for kids to see what is in their environment and practice some good behaviors, like, what does interest rate mean? What is APR? They're jumble letters until you actually learn what the acronym stands for. And so we wanted to make sure that kids could kind of connect their physical world to these abstract ideas about money. So all these activities are kind of a way to get kids to start thinking about it. And, and we were like, kids aren't really going to want to do activities. It's extra homework. So we tried to make them fun and things that they could actually do and feel like they were learning something.
And I think this was a good example where the activity really, to me, is a rabbit hole of other learning, right? So if you go to the bank and do this activity, just like you suggested, Allison, it leads to other conversations and questions like, what is the Federal Reserve and what is an insured account? What does that mean? You talk about that in the book. How do you explain the Federal Reserve? What is compound interest? Why is that so important? What is principal? What's interest? What do terms mean? And I think it, again, leads to further conversations, which obviously, hopefully, sparks some motivation and curiosity to learn more on this topic. Dylin, in chapter 3, Introduction to Investing, you cover very important topics, why to invest, risk versus reward. I love the risk-o-meter throughout the book. That was really neat. Liquidity, the importance of conducting research. And connecting back to my previous comment about the difficulties teaching a child about money when it may not be tangible, can't see it, can't feel it type of a mindset. I think this is another area where parents may feel challenged to teach a child the importance of investing when, again, it might feel somewhat abstract. And here we're talking about delayed gratification, right? So not spending money on something today that has an instant reward. I think back to my childhood, it was driving to the corner store, buying baseball cards, buying candy. You earned the money, you spent the money, you saw the reward instantly. So here, the activity on investing, which I thought helped to really drive this concept further, you talk about an activity of picking a stock and really going through that process of understanding what's involved there. So talk us through that type of an activity, what's involved in that, and why that's important to help a child relate to the concepts of investing.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because I can also relate it to how Allison and I do our own investing. And most of what we do, to be honest, are buying mutual funds and index funds. We don't do a lot of single stock buying. However, there are some advantages to just helping a child or anybody really think about, well, if you were to buy a single stock, what would the thought process be when you do that? We actually just wrote an interesting post on our blog just about a week ago where we had $10,000 that we wanted to experiment with. And what we did is we selected 5 different stocks to invest that $10,000. So $2,000 per stock. And I went through the process in that blog post of, why we would do this. And it wasn't to get rich quick or to see, what would happen in a week or a month. This particular blog post talked about a 1-year time frame. And it's the same with the activity for the child. I think we used a relatively short time frame so they could at least measure their success. At the end of the day, investing, as you know, and as your listeners know, it's very much a long-term process where you're investing, over years and decades. But again, to get the child to think about some of the things that you might want to think about with whether you're investing in stocks or any sort of investment, what are the things that go into that thought process? And so getting back to that blog post that I wrote, some of the stocks that I suggested that we test out One was a blockchain ETF. So now that Bitcoin and other Coinbase just went public, those are things that we wouldn't necessarily invest in directly. But a blockchain ETF is an example of a way you could dip your toe into that technology. So that was the thought process there. Another example was a cruise company, NCL, Norwegian Cruise Lines. Now that COVID is starting to disappear and everyone's getting vaccinated, there's this pent up demand to start traveling again. And so we thought, hey, in the next year, NCL may actually start to look really good. And they even have a program where if you have 100 shares, you get extra bonus points. And so the idea there is think about all the different aspects to that investment. Like, how does it relate to what's going on in the world right now? And what other pros and cons are there to that investment?
Yeah, and I think we share, your philosophy. What I heard there is, our planning team often says a good investing plan should probably be as about boring as watching paint dry. At the end of the day, it's about a long-term play. But I like this activity as a concept. I remember I had a great Econ 101 teacher that had us do a similar activity. And it's very memorable because, it also leads to many other conversations like, well, what type of influences might marketing have? Or, I thought this was going to go this way and it didn't go this way. Maybe I had some overconfidence, in my selection of things. So why is diversification important? So I think, again, reading it and doing it, two very, very different things. And I think people experiencing this firsthand, especially think of an 8 to 12-year-old, a very kinesthetic learner, right? Hands-on, experience that moment and be able to learn through that experience. Allison, as I went through the book, many times I thought to myself, man, what if I would have had some of this information earlier? What if I would have had this in middle school or high school or perhaps even earlier? And shout out to my parents who did an awesome job, of the foundations, grew up in a small business, felt like I had a little bit of a head start. But outside of some K through 12 programs and in higher education, I would say it's largely absent, maybe some elective courses or some opportunities. And so I can't help but think, like, why aren't we doing more of this? Why aren't we covering more of this in a K through 12 education? I mean, this type of book, this type of experience, these types of activities would be a home run in teaching kids about money. Here we're talking 8 to 12 investing, but obviously we all know it's broader than that as well. So question here, I'm not asking you to solve the personal finance educational system woes, but why do you think this is not more foundational to our educational system in terms of personal finance education?
Right. So I think part of it is that our generation didn't really learn this either. And so as the educators come up with their curriculum, I think honestly, a lot of adults are really intimidated by personal finance. And so it's something that seems easy enough for them to cut out of the education system as an elective because, well, if they don't understand it, then kids aren't going to understand it. And if they're intimidated by it, then kids are definitely going to not understand it and be intimidated by it. So let's not even talk about it, which actually is one of the reasons why we thought it was important to write the book. We didn't get this education when we were growing up. I know my parents are second generation immigrants. And so the money lessons that they learned were from their parents who grew up during the Great Depression. And as immigrants coming over to this country, they just pooled their money and they saved and they saved and they worked, 20 hours a day to make money. And then they would maybe invest it in the bank, although plenty of my relatives didn't even bother with that. So, my lessons growing up were save and save and save and save. I had a little piggy bank and I would put all my coins in from the piggy bank, but that was the only thing that I learned. And so it wasn't until I got to college and then I had my first credit card that I just, that was bad. I did not understand the concept of paying credit cards and interest rates and late fees and minimum payments. And so, I got in trouble with credit cards after I graduated. And it wasn't until after that I thought, I really need to learn more about what's going on here. And so I started watching some shows on PBS, but by then, I'm in my early 20s. At that point, my learning took a lot longer for the habits to become ingrained in me. So I really do think that if kids could see this stuff earlier, it would be so much more impactful. I've talked to a girlfriend of mine, her daughter is 17, and she read the book and she was like, yeah, I'm going to start doing the savings plan. And when I get a job, and my friend was laughing because she's like, my daughter doesn't have a job, but she was just like, she got inspired by it. And I thought, if we could just get kids learn this stuff sooner.
Yeah.
All the things, all the great things we could do with them. So hopefully.
Yeah, and I love that. To that point, Allison, I think it was early in the book. You have the reader go through an activity where they identify, problems, things that could be improved upon, right? And one of the things I often say is that any business is a solution to a problem, and that solution is one that people care about and are willing to pay for. And I love that, because I think for a child, like if they can think about what are some things that could be done better. One of them you proposed in the book, which was really cool because we recently just bought this or actually we got as a gift for our kids from our family, is you mentioned like chess, really hard game for kids to play, kids to learn. Why isn't there, a solution out there that can make chess easier to play? Sure enough, there is. There's a card game where you draw cards, you learn the basic moves of chess. So things like that, I think you're inspiring some of the creative thinking, the problem solving, and laying some of the seeds of entrepreneurship. Or even for those that don't own their own company, which would be the vast majority of folks, intrapreneurship. How can you be a problem solver within your organization? And how can you create solutions that make you a valuable asset within that organization? I want to shift gears a bit to connect some of the work that you have in investing for kids with what you cover in your site, retiredby45.com. You mentioned your other FIRE book as well. And I got the impression that you both of you believe that everyone could put together, especially an 8 to 12-year-old reading the Investing for Kids book, put together a plan for FIRE, again, financial independence, retire early, by the age of 45. So Dylin, our listeners know firsthand that time in the market equals success, and that compound interest, as you mentioned in the book, is the eighth wonder of the world. So we know the math is possible if someone starts at an early age, but why do you think it's important that someone plans for FIRE by the age of 45?
Whether you're able to retire in your 40s or your 50s, or you do a traditional retirement in your 60s or even beyond. Allison's dad, for example, is 70 now or slightly older, and he has no intentions of stopping working, even though Allison suggests that he stop and enjoy life. But he's got a job that he really loves. And so there's a lot of people out there that are like that. So we love our FIRE lifestyle and the fact that we left our W-2 jobs in our 40s, but we know it's not for everybody. But what we do also know is that the concepts of financial independence are good for anybody, no matter when you might want to retire. And those concepts are really, about doing the right thing with your money. So it starts with, saving. It starts with being somewhat frugal. And when we say frugal, we don't mean living a Spartan lifestyle. We just mean not going crazy with money, with spending on things that you don't want or that you don't need, or you feel like you have to keep up with the Joneses and get a brand new SUV every two years. So there's that. And of course, investing wisely. And, we have another story that we write about on our blog, which kind of, I think, can be somewhat inspiring to people who are in their 20s and maybe haven't really done anything with their finances yet. We, as Allison alluded to earlier, our story is we met in New York and then we moved to San Francisco, and we were in our mid-20s at the time, and we still hadn't invested $1 yet. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until our late 20s that we got quote unquote real jobs with a 401k plan and that sort of thing. And so it wasn't until our late 20s that we really started investing. Our entire investment life cycle, if you will, was about 17 years, from our late 20s to our early 40s. And in that time, we just were so diligent about dollar cost averaging. We invested into both our 401k, our IRA, and a taxable account once we got some extra income, literally on a weekly basis for years and years and years, no matter what the market was doing, through the 2001 .com crash, because we're both working in that industry. And of course, through the 08-09 recession, never stops. And so those kind of habits, again, are good for anybody, no matter what your retirement goals are. Just really, those financial habits are gonna put you in a great position.
Yeah, and I'm glad you shared that, Dylin. One of the questions I had for you was, I read your story of not really late 20s, early 30s getting serious about investing, but retired or achieved FIRE at 43, 44. So short window of time, right? We tend to think of a very long trajectory of savings. You mentioned 17 years. So my question was, what was the secret sauce? And if I heard you correctly, it was, tax advantage accounts, 401ks, IRAs, some taxable accounts, and dollar cost averaging and being consistent. Is that fair?
Yeah. A couple other things we did. The phrase side hustle is really popular now.
Mm-hmm.
But when we did it, we just called it a side business. This was in the mid 2000s. I came up with an affiliate marketing business that I ran on the weekends, and it ended up being a third income for us. So there's things like maximizing your income.
Mm-hmm.
And then, another concept, and I'll shoot it over to Allison to talk about, is geographic arbitrage. And that helped us kind of move about 9 years ahead of schedule. Do you want to talk about what we did there?
Sure. So geographic arbitrage has a lot of different meanings for people. And the gist of it is that you leverage your current salary and move to a lower cost location. And so most people think of that as, I'm going to make my United States salary and move to Thailand or Costa Rica, where the cost of living is exceedingly low. We did it by moving from San Francisco to Oakland, California, which geographically is a 10 mile difference. But at the time, we were able to save about 50% on our housing costs.
Wow.
So yeah, it was pretty insane for being 10 miles away, 2 or 3 train stops away on our BART system. We were able to pay off our condo in Oakland in cash by selling our place in San Francisco, which alleviated all the mortgage payments, the increase in property payments, and our insurance went down as well. So that, Dylin calculated later, saved us probably about 9 years of working because our mortgage in San Francisco was so astronomical that just cutting 50% off just pushed us into the financial independence sphere that much sooner. So, I mean, it's things like that. Obviously not everybody is going to be able to save 50% of their housing by moving 10 miles away. But there are other ways to do it. You can do things like house hacking, where if you have space on your property, you could build an extra unit and rent it out. Or, if you have an extra bedroom, you could rent it out and, have a roommate or Airbnb it. So there are ways to do it without going through the extreme example that we had. But so there are plenty of ways to cut costs in your life that are relatively painless, that we talk about all the time. So there are just different ways to do it to achieve FIRE. And some people don't even choose to do the early retiring. And like my father is the example. So retirement is really more of the optional part. We're not saying you have to retire, you have to leave your job and just sit around drinking mojitos all day long, although it's certainly not a bad lifestyle. But, the retiring part is up to the individual.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Allison, because I know many of our listeners love what they're doing as a pharmacist, and they worked hard and they got a doctorate degree and they have student loan debt and they invested in that education. And so my read is that many pharmacists are captivated by the idea and the power of financial independence. And, I believe that's a goal we all should strive for a variety of reasons, with RE retirement early being one of those, perhaps reasons, but other things as well in terms of why that financial independence may be important. So 9 years was estimated from that one decision, which I'm coming full circle, Allison, what you shared at the beginning of Dylin being in the hospital with double pneumonia. And when you start to think about the value of time, 9 years and doing some of those calculations and what does that mean for one's personal situation? I think that's a really powerful example of taking something that can be mathematical or objective and looking at it in a different mindset. If we were to make this move or this move, what does that mean for us in terms of timeline of retirement, working part-time, pursuing another opportunity? What does that mean for one's goals towards financial independence? I'm glad you discussed geographic arbitrage, because one of the things we see in our profession in pharmacy is that unfortunately a pharmacist's income usually does not translate with cost of living. So here I am in the Midwest, and that income for a pharmacist in the Bay Area might be a little bit more for a similar role, but nowhere near the cost of living difference between Columbus, Ohio, and San Francisco, California. So I think this is a move, especially for many of our listeners that might be saying, I'm making a decent income, but I've got a lot of work to do on student loans. I want to invest. I want to buy a home. I want to do this or that. And at the end of the day, there's only so much income. So it is a move, whether it's near within 10 miles or something a little bit more significant. Is that an option that somebody may be able to pursue? Allison, what have you guys been doing since achieving FIRE? What's been the goals? What's been the priority? How have you been spending time? I think that's one of the other common objections that comes up is like, if I retire at 45, like I don't even know what I would do with my time. Tell us a little bit about the journey since you guys have achieved FIRE.
So it's funny. We fired quite by accident. We were both working in tech startups, and Dylin got laid off, and then I got laid off about 5 weeks afterwards. And so we kind of took the time after we were both laid off to travel a little bit. That was one of the things that two people who are working can't always coordinate their schedules to take some time off. And so we thought, all right, this is the perfect time. We went to Europe for 2 weeks and did a cruise around the Mediterranean and had a blast, and then came back and thought, all right, we got to get back to work. So we went about, we went on interviews, and we just saw just how miserable people were at their jobs, just so stressed out. And I interviewed with this one guy who was like, you need to tell me who said this so I can go talk to them. I'm like, ooh, I don't want to work for you. You're scary. And so, the 3 months turned into 6 months, and then 9 months. And then Dylin figured out, kind of like back of the envelope math, figured out that we could actually retire without having to go back to work anymore. He stumbled into the 4% rule, which we still hadn't at that point knew and heard the term FIRE before. The first 2 years we did a fair amount of traveling domestically. Like, we would go back to visit his mother and my father, who both live on the East Coast, which is one of the things you just don't get time to do when you're working, is spending time with family. And so,
Absolutely.
If we would go back east, we would maybe spend 2 days with each parent, because they don't live that close to each other. And now we can actually go and spend, a week with each parental unit. And that makes a big difference, because, they're getting older, and, living across the country, it's harder to connect with them. So we do a lot more slow travel where we don't have to feel rushed between people. And then it's funny because our retirement has changed as time goes by. So for people who are concerned that, oh, what am I going to do with my time? Your time is yours. You can now make your own schedule. And that, to me, is the beauty of not just financial independence, it's financial freedom, because you can choose what you want to do. And so, the first 2 years we're traveling domestically. The second 2 years were more about traveling internationally. And, we had 2 cats that passed away at 19. So for us, they were like our kids. And so, we did not do a lot of traveling away from them until they passed on. And so once they did, we were like, all right, we're going to go crazy and go travel around the globe. And so the last 2 years have been focused on writing books and going to financial conferences and kind of learning from others, and then, applying that and communicating out to audiences like yours. That's the beauty of the time being yours, is you can make it whatever you want to do. We also do a lot more work with our community that we never had time to do when we were working. So we're a lot more invested in our neighborhood, and we spend more time working with businesses in our neighborhood to bring in more business. So having that luxury of time means you can go and explore whatever interests pop up. So, did we ever think that we would be working with small businesses 2 years ago? Probably not. But now we are, and we're advocates for small businesses in our neighborhood. And that's, something we would never thought we would have done when we first retired.
That's very cool. And I read as well your goal of 60 by 60 countries to visit by the age of 60. If I understand, you're about halfway through. Look forward to following your journey. I'm hopeful you'll be blogging about it along the way as well. Dylin, I'm going to throw the last question I have over for you. And one of the things I think about when it comes to early retirement and achieving financial independence, or the FIRE movement, is that it really does require delayed gratification. And at times, you mentioned the word frugality earlier, and that frugality could be at various levels. As you mentioned, we're not necessarily talking Spartan type of frugality. My question here, though, is how do we strike the balance, whether it's for ourselves or teaching our kids about, saving and investing to take care of our future selves, but also valuing and making sure we understand that it's important that we enjoy some of the money along the way as well. I find myself often struggling with this individually of, okay, I know I need to take care of my future self. And probably sometimes I do that at the expense of the experiences and the enjoyment today. And I think striking this balance is really important. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll actually plug a couple of other books besides ours that I really like. One is A Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins, which I highly recommend. And another one is actually one of Allison's favorites. It has a funny title. It's I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. And we saw him speak. He was a keynote speaker at FinCon a couple of years ago. And one of the things that he said, which really resonated with me, and it goes to your question, is spend liberally on things that you enjoy, but pull back aggressively on things that are not important to you. And it's a very simple concept. But again, it goes directly to your question. And it's really, maybe you or your kids or whoever's thinking about this makes a list. Here are the things I'm passionate about. Here are the things that I really enjoy. I love travel. I like eating out at restaurants. I like entertainment, sports, whatever it is. And I'm going to set, my budget to focus on those things. I'm going to be okay. Maybe I'll go to a World Series game because I'm a huge baseball fan, or I'm going to set a goal to go to every baseball park in America, whatever that goal might be. Conversely, think about the things that aren't that important to you. Like, maybe a brand new car is not important to you. So you drive your car for 10, 20 years and you really just never focus on spending a lot of money on that. And so those are the concepts that I think, are something to really think about. And for us, that's what we've always done. When people look at our lifestyle from the outside, or even some of our friends, they may think, wow, we've always lived in pretty expensive apartment or condos or houses. So they might think, wow, they spend a lot of money. But if you look a little deeper, like we had a car for almost 20 years. We had a Volkswagen Jetta. We just recently got a new to us, it was a couple of years old, Toyota Corolla. So there's an example where we just, having a brand new car wasn't that important to us. But again, we have the 60 by 60 goal. So travel is really important to us. And we have no problem, spending that extra money to go and travel for a few months and really try to see the world, because that's something that we're passionate about. That being said, when we do travel, we try to, we don't stay at 4-star hotels, because part of our kind of nature is to also find some deals here and there and to just spend consciously, to just, spend our money kind of wisely.
We'd prefer to spend money on the experiences rather than the hotel room that we're putting our suitcase in.
Yeah. And I was at that keynote that you were at, and with Ramit, and I'll never forget it. I mean, the concept that he talks about that will teach you rich money dials, right? Is find the things that are of value to you and dial it up, and find the things that are not and dial them down. And, I remember hearing that and I was like, heck yeah, like it just makes so much sense. And, to the comment of experiences and even the literature really showing, happiness related to money, it's experience and giving, typically are the areas where we see that biggest connection. So Allison and Dylin, I really appreciate you guys taking time to come on the show. Kudos on the work here with investing for kids. I really enjoyed it, as well as the work that you're doing at retireby45.com and your other book, Start Your F.I.R.E, a modern guide to early retirement. As it relates to the book Investing for Kids, I hope our audience will pick up a copy of this, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, many other online vendors as well. I really did find it engaging. It was rich with relevant information, practical exercises to apply the information. As I mentioned, certainly does not look, feel, or read like a textbook. And so I think many in our community are going to find it helpful. What's the best place for our audience to go to follow the work that the two of you are doing?
Well, I'll plug our website, and then I'll have Allison plug our Instagram account. Retireby45.com is our website, and we blog there on once or twice a month with a fresh new blog post. And we have a bunch of stuff on there, courses and other things. And then Allison's been working on really putting together a pretty cool Instagram account.
So we have Instagram and Twitter, both at retire_by_45. It's been an interesting challenge trying to get into the social media space.
Very good. We will link to both of those in the show notes, as well as the retireby45.com, as well as the books that we've mentioned, not only your books, but the others that you reference as well. So two of you, thank you again very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim. It's great. OH.
IO. Thanks, Tim. Great talking to you.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.